Hi, I'm Nicole Slowey. I'm the Operations Director here at Qdos, and today I'm going to be chatting through the results of our Contractor IR35 Reform survey. At Qdos, it was really important, as close to the post-reform date as possible, that we gained an understanding of how our contractors actually suffered and experienced IR35 reform. So we surveyed over 1,800 contractors across a number of different industry sectors, including IT and finance, oil and gas, and engineering. And the results from the survey are somewhat interesting. So first and foremost, of the 1,800 contractors that we surveyed, only 77% of them had actually received a determination at the point of survey. In addition to that, of the 77%, only 56% of them actually received what they deemed to be a formal status determination statement. So what does that actually tell us? Realistically speaking, it supports what we already knew. Lots of organisations were very late to the table as far as the IR35 preparations. Lots of organisations were not fully au fait with the fullest extent of their obligations in terms of actually providing a formal status determination statement. And where that leaves contractors and where that leaves clients is in a bit of a tricky situation. So we have a number of contractors who at the time were without a determination. We had a number of clients who had failed in their obligations in two counts really. One in actually undertaking the determination in the first instance, and then two where they actually then made that determination but actually failed to formally communicate that to the contractor in the mechanism that they are required to do so per the legislation. As far as how clients actually made those determinations on contractors, 63% used support. So that either came in the form of HMRC CEST at 38% or IR35 specialist at 25%. Now that just goes again to demonstrate that organisations need support, they needed help, they needed guidance in order to arrive at making those determinations. It's not surprising that HMRC was the lead tool or the lead mechanism that was used. It is, after all, the revenue's kind of chosen piece of guidance. Many businesses simply couldn't see past the fact that it was the revenue's own tool, and as such ignored the fact that they could use it on a voluntary basis and it wasn't actually a mandatory tool. Now, for contractors on the receiving end of assessed determination, the tricky thing for them is that their view and their understanding of the reality of their working practices potentially hasn't been taken into consideration, and it might be very one-dimensional in that only the clients have actually had the opportunity to feed into those determinations. The outcome of the determinations that were made, we've seen a split of 65% contractors considered inside IR35 and 35% of those contractors surveyed considered outside of IR35. Now again, no material surprises there, in that we know that the likes of assessed are more inclined to potentially be more risk averse. Clients' own understanding when using a tool on an unguided and unsupported basis are more likely to be risk averse and perhaps not fully appreciating the specific nuances that exist within the legislation. As we've talked about before, HMRC's CEST tool doesn't consider all of the key status tests. So there's a key aspect of case law which actually wouldn't have been considered in some of those determinations. In addition to that, it suggests that organisations still have a way to go as far as pragmatically considering the IR35 status of the contractors that they engage with. Our CEO, Seb Mealy, has commented the fact that he sees this as a sign that organisations have room to grow in terms of their understanding and how they can continue to use contractors on a compliant basis. We're still pretty close to the introduction of the reform, so there's time yet for organisations to develop their thinking and their approach to this on an ongoing basis from here on in. For contractors who were considered inside IR35, the lead engagement option, as expected, was in fact to utilise the services of an umbrella company. Now, there is a significant amount of ongoing discussion in the marketplace at the minute around the need for regulation in that particular sector. And that's going to be something that we're going to see continue right the way throughout 2021 and possibly into 2022 as well. Now, if you're a contractor who has had to utilise the services of an umbrella company or a client or a recruitment agency, it's important that you have a solid appreciation of how the individual contractors are being paid, ensuring that all taxes are being deducted at source to make sure that the contractor is properly operating as an employee for tax purposes. Now, there are a whole host of other pieces of legislation, client and agency side, that actually come into force if you're potentially engaging with an umbrella company who isn't considered compliant. So there's a wider piece of supplier due diligence and risk assessment that needs to be undertaken to make sure that the organisations paying the contractors are doing so in as compliant a tax manner as is possible. Since the introduction of reform to IR35 legislation in the public sector in 2017, the postponement of the reform in the private sector in 2020, and the introduction eventually in 2021, it has actually in itself caused lots of contractors to rethink whether contracting is the right thing for them. So we would already have seen in advance of the legislation last year, per the original date, a consequence of the public sector reform back in 2017 and the period in between then and now. And also the new date of 2021, where contractors themselves have actually made that decision to remove themselves from the market and actually go on to find potential permanent routes of employment or other types of ways in which to be engaged. Of the contractors that we surveyed, 33% of them actually said that they would look to specifically find outside of IR35 placements. I personally think that number's quite low. I think contractors are looking for certainty and, to an extent, an element of security around their earnings. So as I said previously, some of them may already have actually made the decision to look at working with their clients on a fixed term contract basis or a permanent employment basis, where we see that number being a little bit lower than expected, because naturally most contractors today, if given the option, would want to continue to operate on an outside of IR35 basis. But the landscape has changed as a result of the changes in the legislation itself following the reform. IR35 reform is going to have a lasting impact on the contractor market, where contractors either are forced to or choose to make certain decisions about the way in which they operate and if contracting is actually for them. Of the contractors we surveyed, 1 in 5 of them have said that they will no longer contract going forward as a result of IR35 reform. Now, that's a significant volume of talent, of specialist skills and expertise removing themselves from that contingent labour market. Organisations are potentially going to struggle and have different types of challenges securing those levels of expertise and skills going forward if that 1/5 actually plays out into reality. In the round, the survey results paint a pretty illuminating picture as far as client latency and general approach around reform preparation, client utilisation of CEST, in that we almost exclusively expected a significant number of organisations to do that, and similarly with contractor reaction as far as how they feel following the introduction of the legislation and the immediate impact that it's had on them. Going forward, we definitely expect to see organisations reevaluating their approach to the legislation, bringing in new and different compliance processes to ensure their obligations are being met on an ongoing basis, and hopefully see some organisations actually making positive change so that they can continue to access those expertise and strong skill sets from the contracting community, and that the contracting market as a whole will begin to thrive as we come out of the lasting effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you for watching our video today. You can download all of the stats that I discussed via the link below, where you'll be able to access the IR35 survey results infographic. To stay up to date with future videos from Qdos, please subscribe to our channel.